and welcome back to Genesis Designs and Modelcraft, and welcome to Defiantly Detective, a non-modelling episode whereupon I try and figure out what this is. Clearly it's a box of bubble wrap. I will expand. So, coming up very soon now, the Even More Modelling for Beginners series will commence in a couple of weeks' time now with the build of this kit, the Airfix 1/48 scale bolt and pull Defiant, and I will be building this aircraft, which is serial number November 3228. I have been waffling on about building this kit for a very long time now. It feels like a very long time anyway, and I do have a friend who is a bit of an expert on Defiance who watches my videos. And upon my commencement of waffling about the build, he got in touch and offered me a lot of pearls of wisdom, sent me photographs, was talking about potential pitfalls with the kits, inaccuracies, things like this. And at a certain point during these chat fragments, he asked me if I would like to have a piece of a real Defiant, because he has done some work with a team of people who have dug up the remains of a real aircraft. And he proceeded to send me this in the post. Here we go. This is a fragment of a real bolt and pull Defiant which crashed and was destroyed, killing the pilot in World War II. And what I didn't cotton on to immediately, but afterwards went back and said, hang on a minute, this fragment is actually a piece of the very aircraft that I want to build, November 3228. Really, this is a piece of it. So what actually happened then to this aircraft? And if I said the serial number wrong, I apologise. I can't remember if I said it right or not, and I don't want to refilm the whole thing. So just ignore my ineptitude. We all know it's there. So, the aircraft N3328 was built in November 1940 and taken on charge by 151 Squadron at Royal Air Force Wittering in October of that year. Coded as DZZ, as shown, and at some point gained the toothy grin that we see on the Airfix version. In April 1942, 151 Squadron stopped operating Defiance, and the aircraft ended up at RAF Manby in Lincolnshire. And in October of 1944, the aircraft was to be transferred to the care of Number 10 Air Gunnery School. And this required a ferry flight from Manby to RAF Walney Island at Barrow in Furness. And to this end, the aircraft took off on that morning at 09:30 hours in good weather, but poor weather was forecast for later in the day. When the aircraft reached the area of Barnoldswick, it entered the aforementioned poor weather, and unfortunately, around about 11:50, it crashed near Lower Clough Farm, Brogden Lane, Barnoldswick, apparently whilst flying through a hailstorm. The pilot is sadly being killed in the crash. There was only a pilot in the aircraft at the time, and that pilot was Flight Sergeant John Leslie Goulter from Australia. He was born in 1920 in Queensland and enlisted in Brisbane. His brother, Howard Goulter, was serving in the Royal Australian Air Force in England at the time of the crash, being pilot with 12 Squadron. And the aircraft was recovered at the time, as was normal in this country. There were a team that went round picking up all the crashed aircraft and scrapping and recycling and what have you. But as is also standard, they weren't terribly thorough. They would take the big pieces with them and go away. And there have been multiple digs on the aircraft since, the most recent being in 2002. Some of that is actually on YouTube if you look for it. In that recent dig, that's where this has come from. Some fairly major items were recovered, including some personal effects from the pilot, which were returned to his family in Australia. So not only have I got a piece of a real Defiant to look at, it's a piece of the actual aircraft that I want to model, which personally I find to be just utterly brilliant. So I cleaned it. It's still muddy when I got it. I carefully cleaned it with cotton buds and water and inspected it closely, trying to figure out basically what it is. Being an aircraft technician by trade, and having been one for quite a long time now, that was my immediate thing. What actually is this? What are all these colours on it? So let's look at it together. I'm going to zoom in, and if I go off out of shot again, just bear with me. You all know. Okay, here we go. So immediately, and I should explain at this point in case anybody feels the need to try and correct me, I am an airframe technician. I've been an airframe technician for 23 years. That means, or a rigger in old words. So structures, controls and things like that are my bread and butter. And instantly when I looked at this, I thought this is some form of bell crank. This is clearly a control rod. And this appears to be some form of adjustable, potentially an adjustable sort of spring return mechanism. You can see there are 2 points that this rod could be held. Obviously it's sheared off, and this has been twisted and bent by the enormous force of an impact. That's the first thing I thought when I saw it. This area here, there is still signs of a machined surface and no paint is present, which makes me think it's actually a stop. The split pin is a little inelegant, but it could have been damaged in the crash, I suppose. But it's still there, and the part is still pivoting freely. There isn't even all that much corrosion actually. So that was my initial reaction. The second was that I assumed this was interior green, although I now don't think it is. I actually think it's just grey primer. And that is prevalent on this part. On the control rod though, again I initially assumed, never assume, that it was interior green, but on closer inspection, having removed the dirt, it's quite clear to me that that's actually sky. And if I turn it over, that's external camouflage green, and there are traces of what look like they might be dark earth as well. You can see a little bit of green overspray here, and ultimately just here is some black. So this just really piqued my interest. I just wanted to try and figure out what this part is. It's a control rod, a relatively hefty one, and a part of a bell crank or a lever. And that got me to thinking, are there any real Defiants left? Well, yes there is, just the one, or I should say just the one complete and intact Defiant, which is currently on display at the RAF Museum in Cosford. So I thought, well, let's see if we can go and have a look at her. So, ably assisted by my friend and colleague Nick Brown, who works at Cosford, I was able to arrange a visit where I was to be allowed close access to that aircraft. And just for interest, that aircraft is in fact N1671, which also served the RAF from 1940 and was operated by 307 Polish Squadron and then number 285 Squadron from 1942 onwards. It was set aside for preservation in 1944 and initially displayed from 1960. It was completely restored by Medway Aircraft Preservation Society at Rochester after having been on display at RAF Museum Hendon for many years, and was returned there for further display from 2012 onwards, and then it was moved to Cosford more recently as part of Hendon Museum's efforts to display a lot of helmets rather than a lot of aircraft. They disassembled the Battle of Britain display hall, which is where the Defiant was, in the process of these updates to their displays. You may be able to detect a hint of cynicism in my tone there. So that's the aircraft I went and looked at. And I'll put some photos that I took on the day over some of this waffle, because I know some of you don't like sitting and staring at a screen with no moving pictures on it. This is more of a sort of visual podcast, really. So, bearing in mind I was thinking this looks like a bell crank, a little bit of a control rod. My assumption, based on that, and not knowing anything really about the Defiant obviously, is it's probably a trim tab control or some such. So when we got there, that's what we were looking at. And unfortunately, despite looking very carefully, we were completely unable to to find where this part should have come from. It's quite mysterious. The aircraft was black when it crashed, and yet clearly this control rod is still sky, dark green, traces of dark earth. This is still primered, and when the aircraft was repainted, you would expect that the external element of it would have potentially received some overspray. So I don't know. It's also the case that this control rod is actually a bit more substantial than most of the control rods on the external control surfaces of the aircraft we looked at. I'll just show you in the reference book. These photos are of that aircraft, and you can see here this is the rudder control horn or bell crank, and that's the control rod for it, which is essentially a rigid cable, not a rod. And here you can see a photograph of an internal bell crank and various diagrams showing the setup of some of the control system rigging. So yes, we were unfortunately unable to see anything that really resembled the part that I have. We looked everywhere on the outside of the aircraft, but obviously, unfortunately, we weren't able to access the inside of the aircraft or of course take any panels off, so it was impossible to find it. And we crawled around on the floor and we did look for quite some time. So I have developed a theory, and I'm not for a second suggesting that I'm right, because as I say, I'm not a Defiant expert at all, and I don't really know what the internals of the aircraft look like, but I suspect potentially that this part may have come from somewhere in this area as part of the internal linkage towards the elevator or rudder controls. This diagram's only showing the rudder controls, but the elevator controls obviously run through here as well. And think that it could potentially have got paint on it. Here we go, this area here, because these fillet fairing panels here are just light alloy panels that are fitted and can be fitted after paint when it's done in the factory, which would explain to some extent why this is still in day fighter colours, because the black paint would have been applied overall after the fact. But I can't confirm that in any way, shape or form. It's just a theory. So unfortunately, and of course all the detailed photos in this book are of the aircraft that I went and looked at as well. So not able to specifically find what this part actually is, but I did have a really nice time at Cosford. I want to extend a huge thank you to Nick Brown and to Sully of Sully's Scale Models, who works also at Cosford, and hosted us for the time that we were there and helped us out and allowed us very, very close access to the aircraft. And looking forward further still, I do intend to create a base for the finished model, and I will put this part with the model on the base when it is complete, and with a plaque or some such detailing the the aircraft and the pilot as a form of a tribute. So there it is, a 15 minute video about nothing. I still don't know what this part is. I still think it's a control rod and a bell crank of some description, but unfortunately I can't specifically say exactly what. So again, big thanks to everybody on all of this. I have found it ridiculously interesting. I appreciate that probably my short précis of it is less so. But again, thanks to Andy Long for initially actually kindly donating this part from his collection, and for all of his expertise thus far, and I'm quite sure he'll be involved in the build to come as well. Thanks again to Nick Brown for helping organise the day at the RAF Museum. Thanks to Sully of Sully Scale Models here on YouTube for hosting us while we were there. And thanks to all of you for watching this video. I look forward to seeing you all again on the Even More Modelling for Beginners journey in the next few weeks that is going to start. And with all of that said, I think it only remains for me to say, until next time, look after yourselves, look after each other, and Genesis out.